Hi friends, Krista here. Thanks for stopping by Books and Jams. Today I have a fun little surprise wrap up of a few books to share with you. I recently participated in Battle of the Booktubers, hosted by Danni from Danni Dabbles. I really enjoyed participating in round 4 of Battle of the Booktubers. And then, surprisingly, Danni put out a video where she personally gives recommendations to each of the 16 people who participated. So I thought it would be fun to read the 4 books that Danni recommended for me. I had never heard of any of these books before, and I thought it would be fun to just dive into some books that I knew really nothing about. Danni didn't go into long descriptions of the books. She just kind of had her recommendations for each person. So I was excited to see if Danni's recommendations for me would be ones that I would enjoy. And we're going to take a look at those 4 recommendations. I'm going to start with my least favorite of the 4 and move up to my favorite of the 4. And honestly, spoiler alert, I really enjoyed all of these books. I was very surprised by that. I didn't think that I would. I know Danni reads a lot of fantasy, and I read some fantasy, but not a lot of it. And I'm very kind of limited in the fantasy authors and stories that I read. But I think what Danni did well in these 4 books is she picked books with characters that I could root for and that I would like. That is essential for me. And she also picked standalones, which is also wonderful, so I don't have to get stuck into another series. I really feel like Danni did a great job recommending these books to me. So the first one, which ended up getting 3.5 stars for me, is Warrior of the Wild by Trisha Levenseller. This is a YA standalone fantasy, and it's set kind of in this Viking Norse mythology type of a feel of a world. It is fantasy because it's not our real world, but there's not a lot of magic in this book. We follow our main character, Rosmina, who is the third daughter of the ruler of the land, or the little village. Her dad is a little disappointed because he always wanted a son, only got daughters. And so he kind of raises Rosmina like a son, and she trains to be a warrior. Part of becoming a warrior is this final trial that you need to participate in. And Rosmina fails her trial and is sent out of the village, kind of evicted from the village, and sent on an impossible quest to kill the god of this world, who's pretty brutal and steals things, and he's not well liked in any of the villages. It's seemingly an impossible task. So Rosmina is sent out into the wild, where she meets these 2 other guys who were sent out from their village on their own personal impossible tasks. I forgot the name of what their tasks. It has a name. But while in the wild, they become friends, and I will not tell more of the details from there. But things that I liked about this book for sure is the fast-paced nature of it. It's a YA. It is like boom, 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 boom. You are traveling right through. I adored the pacing of this book. I really liked Rosmina's growth throughout the story. She is being trained to be a warrior and to be raised up to be the next leader of their village, following in her father's footsteps. She doesn't really know what that means or understand what that means, but throughout the course of the story really begins to understand what it means to be a leader and if she can hack it. Like I said, I liked the friendships. I liked the characters in it. I especially liked, so she meets out there Eric and Soren. One becomes a love interest and one is a little bit antagonistic, and that one was my favorite. He was kind of a funny side character. I did feel like the romance in the story was not really necessary and a bit insta-lovey, a little bit cringe, a little bit like, hey, we're the only 2 people out here, let's just fall in love. It didn't feel like there was any kind of chemistry building up or reason for them to fall in love other than they're the only ones around. There was a little bit more to it than that, but I just didn't need the romance in it. And I just wanted a little bit more from some of the characters at some points. But overall, it was a very enjoyable read, 3.5 stars. And it's one that I never, ever would have picked up had it not been recommended by Danni. So I'm so thrilled that I enjoyed it. It was a fun read. It was fun. Then we have 2 books that I gave 4 stars to. They're very different. Very, very different. But the first of those I'll talk about is Thorn, Hedge, a little novella by T. Kingfisher. And this is a Sleeping Beauty retelling with a twist. The highlight of this book absolutely was Toadling, our main character, who it's like the fairy godmother who put the curse on Sleeping Beauty. That is who Toadling is. She is delightful, slightly odd, but as the story goes on and you get to know her character a lot more, you see how truly kind and sacrificial she is. How funny the relationship between her and Halim is, this knight who comes to rescue or to even find out if there is this tower with a sleeping woman in it. He's read about it in a story. It's supposed to be very cloaked and she doesn't think anyone knows about it, but she's there. Toadling is there to protect what she knows. And so she meets Halim and they have kind of a fun little relationship. Halim is a cinnamon roll of a character. He's a knight, but he doesn't necessarily want to be a knight. It was funny. There was wonderful little twists and turns along the way. Water magic was the magic system that we learn about a little bit, which is different from other types of magic than I have read before. And also this kind of theme about beauty and goodness. Just because something or someone is beautiful, does that make it good? Or on the flip side of that, just because something isn't stand out beautiful doesn't mean that they're evil. So it kind of takes that theme and runs with it. Because it's a novella, there wasn't very much definition of like a setting or the world as a whole. We kind of are secluded in this one little place. We do get little glimpses of Toadling before and a little glimpses of kind of the land, the kingdom, but they're very few and far between. So it's really out of place, out of time. Just this one little glimpse into this world. But yeah, I gave it 4 stars. I was intrigued. I was delighted. Toadling is a spectacular character and I had a lot of fun with it. So that is my quick little read that I never would have picked up. I never heard of it before. So a lot of fun with that one. If you like a retelling, fairy tale retelling, this would be a good one to pick up. Then we had one that I had never heard of that was not a fantasy. And I didn't know anything about this when I picked it up. But look at all the awards that is won. It is 5 Little Indians by Michelle Good. My goodness. And I think this was a Canada Reads winner. So this is a Canadian novel, obviously. It's an Own Voices. Michelle Good is from the Cree Nation. And this book, this was a heavy duty book. I already said that I gave it 4 stars, but let me tell you about it. We do follow 5 children who had been basically kidnapped from their homes and put into an Indian training school in Canada. And we learn a little bit about the school, but the majority of this book is following these 5 people after they get released from the school and just kind of released into the world with no training, with no support, with no money, with no nothing. They're just kind of let go from these schools. And we follow the aftermath of the trauma and abuse that they suffered in these schools and how that impacts them through decades. So we follow these 5 stories that are interconnected and kind of woven in and out from each other as the story goes on. And it is difficult to read at times, harrowing, so important, heartbreaking, and somewhat hope-filled as well, as they find support in each other and they find support in other elderly Native Canadians and the Indian Cultural Center that they are a part of. It was an intense read for sure. Not one that it's easy to say I enjoyed it. I do think it was important and I'm so glad that it came across my path. I think it was well written to a degree. There was a couple things that I had a little bit of issue with. There was a couple storylines that were pretty abrupt. Clara's storyline in particular, like we leave her at one point and she's leaving a note for her roommate who was also part of the school. She's leaving and then we see her very involved in a movement, Indian, I forget what the name of the movement was, like toting guns across the border. And it was just a very abrupt change in perspective, I guess. It also changes point of view a couple times, even within the same character. So some are told in first person, some are in third person. And that was a little bit tricky. And maybe it was meant to help us know whose story we were following. But listening on audio, it was just a little tricky to to sometimes figure out whose story I was listening to. However, that didn't detract fully from me really appreciating this story. It takes place in the 60s, like I said, in Vancouver for the most part. They all, once they leave the training school, they end up in Vancouver. It was very impactful. It was very impactful. I ended up giving it 4 stars. Definitely some triggers in here if you need to look those up, because there's a lot of stuff in here that is hard to read about. But it was very good at the same time. So 4 stars for this one. So glad that Danni put that one on my radar. And then finally, I don't have this one. It's a very new release. Came out in October of 2024. So just like a month ago. The Scholar and the Last Fairy Door by H.G. Perry. This was another fun book. I gave this one 4.5 stars. And I really enjoyed this historical fantasy. So this one takes place kind of in the 1920s. So like right after World War I, and the war is talked about. And it takes place kind of like in our world, but there is magic. We follow mainly a girl named Clover, whose brother went off to fight in the war and comes home, and they learn that he had been cursed by a fairy. And so she is determined to do whatever she can to try to reverse the curse or cure him in some way. And so she, with the help of a kind friend of her brother and a kind woman who have magic, she begins to learn magic on her own, and then eventually earns a scholarship to this magical school. The college school, magic school setting was a lot of fun. It did have definitely those college vibes in England. So Cambridge, Oxford feel, but like take that into the magical world. And I liked the fact that Clover herself wasn't born a magician, that she was able to learn magic, and even to the point of earning herself a scholarship. I thought that was pretty cool, that it wasn't just like magicians versus non-magicians, but there was this class of magicians called the families, and there was a definite class difference between the families and those who weren't part of that world. And so she earns a spot into the school where everybody else is part of the families. And so there is this political side of things, like who has the right to learn this stuff, this magic, and who doesn't, and why, and who gives us that right and who doesn't. So there are secrets and things that come out as Clover is at the school. She does build a friendship with 3 other students, and their friendship was really cool. All along the way, they begin to learn more about fairies and why fairies aren't really talked about as much. They're not like the gorgeous kind of fairies that you see in other magical books. They are tricksters. They are out to trick you and manipulate. And the fairy world, for the most part, has been closed off. And there are these doors that have been locked. However, this group of friends has a door that they are determined to learn more about and kind of learn about this forbidden side of the magical world. I loved their friendship. Each of these characters was well developed, but also had their flaws. And so as their friendship changes and grows and develops and betrayals happen, and you learn about like the darker side of their personalities a little bit, it felt realistic in a lot of ways. The family dynamics between Clover and her brother and their mom and other siblings, and once she goes to school, like being homesick but also not wanting to go home and miss out, and the difficulties of being home, and they live on a farm, and all the work that she'd have to do, but she's now in this academic setting and really loving the learning academic side of things. That all was very interesting to me. I found the pacing to be spot on, except for there was a few spots that I did feel like this book is a little too long. And I also wanted a little bit more about the things that they were actually learning. I guess that would have added to the length of it though, and so maybe it wasn't necessary. But overall, I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4.5 stars. I thought it was a really fun fantasy, and I love that it was a standalone. I'm hopeful that it's a standalone. It just came out in October, so potentially I guess there could be another one, but as of right now, I didn't really look into it. But I loved the historical aspect of it as well, and this mix of the real world and magical world. And I really liked Clover's character and her growth throughout the story. Yeah, it just was a fun read. I really enjoyed it, and I definitely would never have picked it up on my own. So Danni, you nailed it. You picked 4 books that I really enjoyed overall. 3.5 was my lowest, but this was still a very fun read. More plot driven than character driven, and an unnecessary romance, but I really loved it. A fun twist on a Sleeping Beauty story with a fabulous main character, fairy godmother. A hard-hitting historical look at Indian training schools and the aftermath in Canada. Wonderful. And then The Scholar in the Last Fairy Door, a historical fantasy. All with characters that I could root for in each of these books, all with like fast-paced movement, all with growth in the characters. Like, these books were fantastic. So Danni, you nailed it. Well done. I'm glad you were not in my round. But how fun to read some books that I never would have picked up or didn't even know about, some of them, most of them. So thank you so much for watching. I would love to know if you've read these books as well. If you are now interested in picking any of these up or anything else that you want to talk about, you know I love chatting with you down in the comments. And if you just want to let me know that you were here, but you don't really have anything to say about these books or anything else, go ahead and leave a little castle emoji. I would love to know that you were just here supporting me and watching my channel. I appreciate you so, so much. Thanks for spending a few minutes of your day with me. I really look forward to chatting with you in another video very soon. Bye.